Well, happy Friday, philosophy students. The university has made it clear that they would like for you to see a little bit of my face, so here I am. Today, we're going to cover the peak of the Republic, and that's the section from the end of Book 6 to and through the beginning of Book 7. It includes mainly the simile of the line, the divided line, and the parable of the cave. But the analogy of the sun is also thrown in there as well, which is what we looked at in the last class. The line and the cave are essentially parallels. The cave is simply more graphic, but each one has a level, and they correspond to each other very clearly. On the lowest level of both the line and the cave, you have images and shadows. Moving up to the second level, you have beliefs, opinions, things of that sort. Those two levels are both on the bottom and represent to us the visible world. Moving up into the second main level, we have the intelligible world, where first of all we have various sorts of mathematical ideas, and finally into the world of the forms on the fourth level. The cave presents the same progression, but in a more graphic manner. The cave, as you know, starts out with prisoners chained to a bench, one of whom gets loose and moves around and sees the fire and sees the puppets, and then moves all the way out of the cave and sees the world as it is and sees the sun. That escaped prisoner represents Socrates, of course. For what happens to him when he comes back into the cave? The prisoners really don't want to be told that the world that they have considered to be real, the world of shadows on the wall of the cave, is not the real world. And so, this individual who has escaped and seen reality as it is, now is persecuted and, of course, in the case of Socrates, put on trial, convicted, and executed. The parable of the cave represents, as well as the divided line, represents Plato's way of getting to his most important theory, namely the theory of forms. The forms represent ultimate reality, or you might say they represent what is. Plato's theory is an exaggerated theory of forms. It's an exaggerated theory of the kind of existence that our ideas have. There is another end to the spectrum, and this is explained very well in the second video, which I hope you'll watch, and that is the position known as nominalism. Nominalism is essentially the idea that essences, realities, forms do not exist. They are simply labels. They are simply man-made labels. So Plato's at one far end, giving the forms a separate existence, a non-spatial, non-temporal, non-physical kind of existence. And nominalism is at the other end. No essences, no natures. Nothing really is in itself. In between, you get Aristotle and eventually Aquinas, following Aristotle. You get the position that we call moderate realism, which says that the form, as Plato called it, exists in each individual, individuated. And it exists in our mind as a universal, or as a general abstract concept. Now, attached to the notes for today, there is a chart that I've made up with regard to these three positions. And if you look down each column, you will see similarities between the position of Aristotle and Plato, but you will see differences as well. If you look on the far right-hand side of this form, which I hope you will print out because you'll need it to study for the test, you'll see various aspects of the position of nominalism. you will see in particular a famous philosopher noted there whose name is Humpty Dumpty. And this is a short quote taken from Alice in Wonderland and Humpty's conversation with Alice. Humpty Dumpty here, I suppose this was intended by Lewis Carroll, represents the position of nominalism. His final sentence says, "The question is," says Humpty Dumpty, "which is to be master? Is it what I want a word to mean, or is it that I must use a word in accord with what something is?" So the question, which you see in bold in the center of the paper, comes down to Humpty and Alice discussing whether we make or discover reality. You might think about Thrasymachus and his idea that justice is the advantage of the stronger. Where does he fall? And you might think, as is noted there, again towards the bottom in the center, of the various aspects of this controversy. And there are noted 5 areas there: metaphysical, ontological, epistemological, ethical, and political. This also gives us an idea of the very many layers that are in the Republic itself. And as I put in the notes, don't look at the cave just in isolation. It's not just an interesting story about prisoners and one of them discovering something called reality, but it is ultimately what Socrates thinks reality is in terms of his view of the soul, and certainly also what Plato and Socrates both realize is going to happen to the one who tries to bring reality to others. Usually not a popular position. Remember Socrates referring to himself as the gadfly in the Apology. All right, well, that's all for now. Read the selections carefully, read this chart which I've attached, and look at the other video, and I'll see you in the next class.